Granada, Spain, the last Muslim kingdom in Iberia, has just fallen to the armies of Ferdinand and Isabella. The Reconquista, the centuries-long Christian reconquest of the Iberian Peninsula, is complete. For the Muslim and Jewish communities who had lived in Granada for generations, what follows is catastrophic. Forced conversion, expulsion, enslavement. The city that had been one of the intellectual and cultural centers of the medieval world is now purged of everyone who doesn't fit the new order. Among the families fleeing south across the Strait of Gibraltar to Morocco is a nobleman named Ali ibn Rashid al-Alami, his wife Lala Zora, a converted Christian, and their young daughter. The girl is approximately 7 years old. Her birth name is Aisha. She will later be known by a title, not a name, Sayyida al-Hurra. It means the noble lady who is free and independent, the woman sovereign who bows to no superior authority. She spends her childhood as a refugee, watching her community rebuild from nothing, listening to the adults talk about what was taken from them, and she never forgets. Welcome back to Women Struck from History. Today's story spans continents and decades. It begins in the burning ruins of Granada and ends with a woman who controlled the western Mediterranean Sea for 30 years, who made Spanish and Portuguese naval commanders pray to God for deliverance, who forced a king to leave his own capital city to marry her. Her name was Sayyida al-Hurra, and she is one of the most astonishing figures in the history of the Islamic world. She was the last person in Islamic history to legitimately hold the title of al-Hurra, Queen. She was a governor, a naval commander, a pirate, and a diplomat. She is also almost completely unknown outside of Morocco. This is her story. Let's stay with that 7-year-old girl for a moment. Her family settles in Morocco, first in Chefchaouen, a city in the Rif Mountains that her father, Ali ibn Rashid, actually founds as a refuge for Andalusian Muslims. The blue-walled city that tourists photograph today, one of Morocco's most iconic places. That city is built by Aisha's father for people like his family, exiles. Chefchaouen becomes a center of resistance, a place where the memory of Al-Andalus, of the civilization that had been destroyed, is kept alive, where scholars, artists, poets, and soldiers who fled Granada try to reconstruct something of what they had lost. Aisha grows up inside this grief and this defiance. She receives a remarkable education for the time: theology, languages, mathematics. Her father is a military man. She absorbs his strategic thinking. By the time she is a young adult, she speaks Spanish and Portuguese as well as Arabic, which will become a significant diplomatic advantage. Around 1510, she is married to a man named Almandri, the governor of Tétouan, a port city on the northern coast of Morocco. He is considerably older than her. The marriage is arranged. These are the circumstances of her world. Tétouan had been destroyed by Castilian forces in 1399, enslaved and demolished. It was destroyed again by the Portuguese in 1437. When Andalusian exiles rebuilt it in the late 15th century, including Almandri's own family, they turned it into something deliberate, the only major Moroccan port not under Spanish or Portuguese occupation, a base from which to strike back at the people who had destroyed their world. Aisha had married into a pirate city, and she was a quick learner. Almandri dies in 1515. His wife has been, by then, his de facto co-governor for years. She has been managing the city's affairs, overseeing trade, handling diplomacy. The population of Tétouan is accustomed to her exercising power, and so, in an event that is unusual enough that historians have debated it for centuries, Tétouan accepts her as its governor. The population bestows on her the title Al-Hurra, the free, the sovereign, the one who bows to no authority above her own. Moroccan historian Muhammad ibn Azzuz Hakim later called her the only woman to have held sovereign power in Morocco. That is a significant designation. Morocco in the 16th century was not exactly a place known for female rulers, but Sayyida al-Hurra was not a conventional ruler. She remembered Granada. She remembered what the Spanish and Portuguese had done to her family, her community, her world. And she had a port city, a shipyard, and access to one of the most experienced communities of pirates in the Mediterranean. She built a fleet. The Mediterranean in the 16th century was a war zone. On one side, the expanding Catholic empires of Spain and Portugal. On the other, the Ottoman Empire and its allied corsairs, privateers who attacked Christian shipping in the name of Islam and in the interest of their own considerable profits. Sayyida al-Hurra reached out east. She made contact with the most feared pirate in the Mediterranean, Hayreddin Barbarossa, the Ottoman corsair who operated out of Algiers. They formed an alliance. Barbarossa took the eastern Mediterranean. Sayyida al-Hurra took the west. Together they controlled the sea. For decades, Spanish and Portuguese ships crossing the western Mediterranean did so at her mercy. She raided their vessels, she captured their sailors, she held them for ransom. Spanish records from 1540 document negotiations between Spanish officials and Sayyida al-Hurra over the release of Portuguese and Spanish captives, which means European governments were dealing with her directly, negotiating with her as an equal, because they had no choice. The Portuguese were particularly terrified of her. A chronicler of the era recorded that they prayed for God to allow them to see her hanged from a ship's mast. For Sayyida al-Hurra, this was not random piracy. It was a continuation of the war that had started in Granada, a way of bleeding the people who had bled her community, of recovering wealth and power from the people who had stolen it from her ancestors. She governed Tétouan throughout all of this. The city prospered under her, trade flourished, the port expanded. Sayyida al-Hurra was simultaneously a naval warlord and an effective city administrator, managing internal affairs with the same precision she applied to maritime strategy. In 1541, something happened that has no precedent in Moroccan history. Before or since, Ahmed al-Watasi, the Sultan of Morocco, proposed marriage to Sayyida al-Hurra. She accepted, but she had a condition. She would not leave Tétouan. If the Sultan wanted to marry her, he would have to come to her. He would have to leave Fez, the capital, the seat of power, the city where Moroccan kings had always conducted their ceremonies, and travel to her city. The Sultan agreed. The King of Morocco crossed the country to marry a woman who refused to leave her own domain. Historians record this as the only time in Moroccan history that a king married outside of his capital city. The marriage was also a political calculation on her part. It gave her additional legitimacy and the backing of the Ouattaside dynasty. But she made clear, by refusing to leave Tétouan even for the ceremony, that she was not giving up her autonomy. She was adding alliance, not submitting to authority. After the marriage, she continued to govern Tétouan. She continued to run her operations at sea. She was now both a queen by marriage and a sovereign by the choice of her city. The fall of Sayyida al-Hurra, when it came, did not come from the Spanish navy, the Portuguese crown, or the Ottoman court. It came from within. Her son-in-law, the husband of her daughter from her first marriage, moved against her. While she was managing a war against Portugal, a coalition of internal enemies struck. Her son-in-law seized Tétouan in 1542. He took her property. He stripped her of power. She was deposed after nearly 30 years of rule. Sayyida al-Hurra retreated to Chefchaouen, the city her father had built, the refuge that had sheltered her family when they fled Granada, the place where it all began. She lived there until her death, sometime around 1561. She was approximately 75 years old. She had outlived her captors, her enemies, and most of the people who feared her. Why does almost no one outside Morocco know who Sayyida al-Hurra was? Part of the answer is the way history has been written. European histories of the Mediterranean in this period are told primarily from the European perspective. The corsairs, the pirates who attacked Spanish and Portuguese shipping, are often mentioned, but usually as threats, as obstacles, as background menace. The idea that one of the most effective of these corsairs was a woman who was also a governor and a political strategist doesn't fit the narrative frame. Arab historians of the period were not especially interested in writing about her either. A 2024 study by a University of Kansas researcher found that Arab scholars of the 16th century generally didn't celebrate female leadership. It didn't fit the social expectations of the time. So she exists in the documentary record mostly as a name in the margins. A Spanish negotiation record here, a Portuguese prayer for deliverance there. There is also something uncomfortable in her story for multiple audiences. She is a Muslim woman who commanded violence against Christian states, which doesn't fit the Western historical framework of who gets to be a hero. She used her faith as a framework for warfare, which doesn't fit certain modern frameworks of who gets to be a feminist icon. She is complex. She doesn't fit neatly. But the complexity is part of why she's worth knowing. Sayyida al-Hurra was shaped by dispossession. She was a refugee child who grew up in a community of refugees, saturated in the memory of a lost homeland. She turned that grief into strategy. She built a career from the ruins of what was taken from her family. She governed well, expanded her city, allied with major powers, and held the most dominant empire in the world, the Spanish Habsburg monarchy, at bay for 3 decades. She was deposed not by enemies but by her own kin. And she died in her father's city, a very old woman, having outlived almost everyone who had tried to stop her. Sayyida al-Hurra's title, the name she is remembered by, says everything about how she understood herself. The noble lady who is free and independent. The woman sovereign who bows to no superior authority. She didn't have a king make her queen. She had a city recognize her as its governor because she had already been doing the job. She didn't wait for permission to build a fleet. She didn't ask for the Sultan's approval before deciding that if he wanted to marry her, he could come to her. She was not given power, she built it. From memory, from grief, from the ruins of Granada, from the sea itself. The Spanish feared her. The Portuguese prayed against her. The Ottoman Empire made her an ally, and a king travelled across his own country to marry her, on her terms, in her city. Her story is 500 years old. She was and still an icon worth remembering. Thank you for listening.